I'm Tuqa Nusayrat. I'm the Executive Director here at ISPU, and I'm thrilled to see all of you here. Just to give you an idea, we had people take the train from North Carolina, from New York, from New Jersey. If you went farther than that, please raise your hand so we can shout you out. But thank you all for being here from close and far. We know this means a lot for many of you and in your areas of work. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge those who made this work possible, our staff, our partners, and the many supporters who share our belief that good policy begins with good data. Thank you first to our incredible research, operations, communications, and outreach teams who were behind the small and big details for this event and this publication. You see some of them here, but we have a virtual team who's also behind their computers around the country making sure that everything goes off without a hitch. So thank you to all of them. We're also incredibly grateful for the support of some key institutional donors who made this research possible, the WF Fund, the Rise Together Fund, and the Baraka Foundation. And in addition, many of you here in the room are longtime and consistent supporters of ISPU, and for that we are incredibly grateful. For those of you who are less familiar with ISPU, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and education organization, and we're dedicated to providing objective, evidence-based insights on the attitudes, experiences, and contributions of American Muslims. And for nearly 2 decades, our goal has been to ensure that public debate, policy decisions, media narratives, and community-led decisions are informed by facts, not fear and not fiction. And this data set, the American Muslim Poll, has become one of our most influential tools in advancing that mission. It remains the only nationally representative, reoccurring survey that not only captures the voices of American Muslims, but also compares their experiences and attitudes to those of other faith and non-faith groups. And you may be wondering, why do we compare Muslims to other faith and non-faith groups? Because the data, looking only at the data American Muslims, means that we're taking them out of context and it's not the full picture. So let me give you an example. In 2020, our data found that 25% of Muslims who have experienced religious discrimination experienced it while getting healthcare services. It might not seem like a lot, but when it's compared to only 5% in the general public who experience it, then it stands out. So with that foundational point, we embarked on a local community-based study to explore the barriers to equitable health care for Muslims in Southeast Michigan. That study provides potential policy solutions and recommendations for many community leaders and stakeholders to systematically advocate for equitable, unbiased, and quality health care. And you can find a one-pager on that study outside today. So this marks the 7th iteration of the American Muslim Poll since we began conducting it in 2016. And over that time, the data has helped journalists, educators, community leaders, and government officials track trends, identify inequities, and measure progress. But the importance of the research goes beyond that. We're gathered here at a very critical and pivotal moment, just months after a deeply divisive 2024 presidential election for our country and for our community as well. One that upended long-held political assumptions and revealed new fractures and opportunities within the American electorate. As you'll see in the presentation today, our findings show that Muslim voters, who were once among the most reliably democratic faith groups, may be in a state of political realignment. Their disillusionment with Gaza policy and U.S. foreign policy broadly, combined with frustration over unfulfilled domestic promises on civil rights and equity, has prompted many Muslims to reconsider their political home. For policymakers and party leaders, these shifts have real implications. In states like Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, where American Muslims represent tens of thousands of votes, they're enough to decide certain races. But more than that, these communities are bellwethers for broader trends amongst young, multiracial, and values-driven voters, groups that increasingly demand alignment between a party's rhetoric and its actions. Our data also underscores another pressing concern that you'll hear about today, which is the rising Islamophobia in our country and in public life. For policymakers, this is not just a civil rights issue. It's an education issue, it's a public health issue, and it's a national security issue, because persistent discrimination erodes trust in institutions and it alienates young people from civic life. And if our goal is to build resilient, participatory democracies, we can't afford to ignore these statistics. But I want to end on a positive note. Despite the challenges, the story of Muslim America is also one of resilience and contribution. Muslims are now amongst the most civically engaged faith groups in the country, a trend that we've been tracking since 2016. They're young, they're diverse and entrepreneurial, and they're deeply invested in America's future. Their priorities, from education to foreign policy to healthcare to civil rights, they mirror those of other Americans, and even as their lived experiences shed light on where our systems fall short. That's why this data matters for policymakers, for party strategists, for community leaders, and public institutions. It tells the story of participation, frustration, resilience, and hope. And it challenges all of us to ensure that every American of every faith has an equal stake in shaping our shared future. So as we move through today's discussion, I invite you to consider what these findings mean for you. Whether you're shaping legislation on the Hill, in Congress, designing outreach programs for our local mosque, or you're reporting about the experiences of Muslims in mainstream media. I want to encourage you to reflect on these findings, and I appreciate you being here and taking the time to be part of this essential conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Saher Selod, ISPU's Director of Research and the co-author of this report, who's going to walk us through the findings of the poll, and then we'll turn to the panel to discuss the implications. Saher Selod was formerly an associate professor and previous chair of the Department of Sociology at Simmons University in Boston. Her research expertise centers on the experiences of Muslims with surveillance. In her first book, Forever Suspect, Radicalized Surveillance of Muslim Americans in the War on Terror, she examines how Muslim men and women experience gendered forms of radicalization through their hyper-surveillance because of the War on Terror. Over to you, Saher.
Thank you.
Yeah. He's going to come and mark you.
Yep. I have to do one quick correction. It's racialization that I studied, not radicalization.
Oh,
it's
a big difference.
Just an FYI. Okay. Thank you, Tuka. I mean, good? Just put it on. Yeah? Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. It's my honor and pleasure to present to you the 2025 American Muslim Poll, Evolving Electorate, Enduring Challenges. As Tuka said, I'm the newish Director of Research for the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding.
Sorry, Saher, I think we're going to move.
Yeah?
Yeah.
In the way. So everyone can see better? Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Perfect.
Okay. After the 2024 presidential election, and the second inauguration of President Donald J. Trump, ISPU conducted our 7th American Muslim poll. The genocide in Gaza, as declared by the International Association of Genocide Scholars in August 2025, and the attacks on American students protesting created a challenging new environment for American Muslims who experience heightened censorship and skyrocketing Islamophobia. As these hardships mounted, so did civic participation. So many Muslims organized to withhold their vote from then presidential candidate Joe Biden and, after his withdrawal, Vice President Kamala Harris in an effort to demand a ceasefire in Gaza. There were also some Muslims who endorsed Kamala Harris and even Muslims who organized for Trump, all of which created tensions within the Muslim community. How did Muslims ultimately vote in 2024? This survey captures vote shares among the splintered electorate, along with policy priorities, satisfaction with President Trump and the direction of the country, and experiences with discrimination. The survey also provides an update on the demographic profile of American Muslims last collected in ISPU's 2022 poll. So I first have to just introduce our team, and so much gratitude to everybody. I co-authored this with the co-PI, Dalia Mogahed, who will be on the panel. Dalia is the former Director of Research for ISPU. I know many of you know this already, and huge shoes to fill for me, and I said to her that I'm most nervous about presenting in front of her today. So thank you so much to Dalia. We have a wonderful research team, many of who are here today, Ikramullah, Sarah Baker, Sarah Goraya, and then we also had advisors. This is a very rigorous study that we produced, so the following experts serve as advisors on the American Muslim poll. I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest. Oh, sorry, I keep it, thank you. Sorry, these are I got to remember this. Okay, in the interest of time, I won't go through everybody, but they're experts in their field at various institutions around the country. But I do want to note that Dr. Yusuf Shahood, who's our analyst, is here today. I might point to him with some hard questions that you might have later. And then also, this is the first time we partnered with NORC. And nerds like myself are very excited about this. NORC is an incredible, really well-regarded at the University of Chicago. It's a nonpartisan research organization and a pioneer in measuring and understanding the world. NORC has studied almost every aspect of the human experience in every major news event for more than 8 decades. And a special shout out to Dr. David Dutwin, who is actually here today. He is the Executive Director and Senior Vice President of AmeriSpeak at NORC. He is a nationally recognized expert in survey methodology and former president of APOR, the American Association of Public Opinion Research. Okay, so the methodology. This is something we'll get a lot potentially questions on in the future. All participants were given an identical survey. There were a total of 2,486 participants. Included in the survey is the general population as well as an oversampling of Muslims and Jews who are underrepresented religious groups in the United States. And so their distinct experiences are rarely polled. As a result, our report is able to compare the responses of American Muslims to Jews, Catholics, Protestants, white evangelicals, and individuals who are not affiliated with any religion. So we're able to really show Muslim experiences compared to other groups and the general population. But what do we know about Muslims that is often underreported or understudied? We are a very diverse population. Knowledge about the varied demographics and intersecting identities of Muslims is vital to understanding their behaviors and attitudes presented in this report. Okay, this is a big slide, but I'm going to break it down for you. Of all the religious and non-religious groups we surveyed, Muslims were the only group without a majority from a single racial or ethnic background. So the plurality of Muslims identified as Black or African American at 28%, 24% identify as Asian, 20% identify as white, 12% as Arab, 9% identify as Latino Hispanic, and less than 1% of Muslims identify as Native American or Indigenous. It is important to note that we offer the participants the ability to identify as Arab or white. So if you don't know, Arabs have historically been racially classified as white according to the US Census. So this allows us to get a little more nuanced understanding of who Muslim Americans are. As previously reported in 2017 and 2022, American Muslims are younger than all other religious and non-religious groups. Roughly 1/4 of Muslims in the US, at 26%, are between the ages of 18 and 24. This is in comparison to 15% of Jews, 12% of Catholic, 5% of Protestants, 7% of white evangelical, and 14% of those who are not affiliated. So what does this mean? It means that Muslims are more likely to be active in the workforce. It means that we have a higher percentage of Muslims who are students, which is very important to understand in this moment. It means that they are of childbearing years, so this population is expected to grow. And for many young American Muslims, this also means that they've grown up in this post-9/11 era. So they're a religious community that has frequently experienced scrutiny, securitization, and stereotyping. Okay, Muslims are more likely than most other groups to rate religion as important to their daily life. So 89% say religion is important to their daily life. That's more likely than 44% of Jews, than Catholics, and even Protestants. But only white evangelicals at 97% ranked religion as higher in importance to their daily life. And I just want to note that this is across age as well for Muslims. So younger Muslims as well as older Muslims we're finding in our survey. But I feel like this is what everybody wants to talk about. And if you don't know, Tuka and I just published, thanks to Zateo, an op-ed on this. So that is available for you all to read as well. I highly encourage you to go and look at it. How were American Muslims engaging with the electoral process? What we know is that Muslims are engaging more. And we see this through the Get Out the Vote campaigns that we saw in 2020, the high number of Muslims. We have a panelist, a state senator from Georgia, who are running for office. So Muslims are actually, what the data shows is that though voter registration has seen a steady increase among Muslims between 2016 and 2020, the percent of legally eligible Muslims registered in 2022 and 2025 are statistically on par with each other. So they remain roughly the same, 81% and 85% respectively. However, look at the jump between 2016 and 2025. So you see a big increase from 60% to 85%. Muslims are engaging and they're registering to vote. But even with that, we found that 37%, Muslims are the most likely faith and non-faith group to experience obstacles when voting. So this is compared to 4 to 16% of all other groups. Long wait times to cast a ballot was the most often cited obstacle, followed by intimidation by private citizens. So this is something, and for the general public, that was between 2 and 6%, we're seeing with other groups. Okay, this is the one everyone wants to know. How did Muslims vote, right? Okay, Muslim voters were in the spotlight during 2024, the election, even though, and this is very important, we're a small percentage of the US population, there were enough Muslims in swing states like Georgia and Pennsylvania in 2020 to determine the outcome. So these are states where Biden won it by a very, very narrow margin, and we saw enough Muslims going out to vote to make up that difference. So exit polling has shown a large percentage of Muslims voted for Jill Stein in 2024, and media articles highlighted this. However, our survey shows that 50% of Muslims, similar to the general public, actually cast a vote for Kamala Harris. This is more than Protestants and white evangelicals, but less than Jews and those who are not affiliated. 31% of Muslims in the survey stated they voted for Trump, less than Catholics, Protestants, and white evangelicals, and the general public at 45%. Now, I need to make a quick note here. 45% is less than the 49.3% from the Federal Election Commission that stated that voted for Trump. So, but it is well within our margin of error of 4%. So this is actually statistically within the margin of error. And also, our survey was conducted months after the election, so there is something referred to as retrospective vote choice bias, which means people may recall who they voted for differently. Just like people may not admit who they were going to vote for in the first place, right, to their friends and families. So important to note. Jill Stein did receive the highest support from Muslims at 12%, compared to 1% or less of all other groups. So not the 50% that some of you might have heard, but 12% is what we're finding in our survey. I just want to also note that Muslims party ID, we have 58% Democrat, 17% Republican, 24% independent. So this is a group whose votes are up for grab right now. Okay, I love these, and this is also in the op-ed. You can see where the vote shifted. So in 2020, we asked Muslims, how did they vote in 2020? And then if they voted for Biden, how many of them voted for Harris? Well, only 55% said, I voted for Biden in 2020 and I voted for Harris in 2024. But what you should note here is only 10% said that they voted for Trump. And you have 16% of those voters who said they voted for somebody else. 19% they did not vote for a president. Not that they didn't vote, but we asked them, did you vote for the president? And 19% said they didn't. Now, among the general public, not shown here, 79% of those who voted for Biden in 2020 reported voting for Harris in 2024. Trump voters. So you have here, and this is really important, 82% stuck with Trump. So of the 2020 Muslim Trump voters, 82% said, yes, we voted for him again in 2024. 1% went to Harris, 1% went somewhere else, and 16% said they did not vote. And among the general public, 81% of those who voted for Trump in 2020 said that they voted for Trump in 2024. Pretty similar on that. Now, who are Trump, because this is what the media focuses on, who are Trump Muslim voters? Well, we know that 42% of them are men. So there's a gender gap. 17% are women. And if actually you look at PRRI, Public Research Institute, here they have a study that shows that young Republican voters are majority men. It's not just Muslims, just FYI, So 42% are men, something we need to dig deeper into. If we break this down by race, and this is where we cannot flatten the Muslim identity, it's very important to understand we are a racially and ethnically diverse group. Black Muslims, 76% voted for Harris. The plurality of white Muslims, 49% voted for Trump. And Asian Muslims were the highest percentage at 22% who voted for Jill Stein. So, this is something that we really need to look at, like racial and ethnic differences amongst the American Muslim electorate. And our analyst, Dr. Shahood, did an amazing job helping us look at what are some predictors of voting for Trump for Muslims. So being a Republican, which makes sense because people tend to stick with their party. That's the 2020 and 2024. Household income of $75,000 or more, being born in the United States, and identifying as white, and any expressed Islamophobia, which I'll go through at the end of this presentation, what those are. So Muslims also do express some Islamophobia, just so you all know. It's not just everybody else, so. Okay, Jill Stein, I get asked this question a lot. Well, are Muslims moving third party, Well, no, because the Muslims who voted third party in 2020, 67% of them said they did not vote for the president, and only 23% voted third party. So I think this is something else that we can talk about, and when we're going to look at the policy issues here. So what are Muslims saying are the most important policies to them? Muslims cite the economy as number 1, the war in Gaza as number 2, and healthcare as number 3 top policy priorities in 2024. So what we found was that for Muslims, across party affiliation or who they voted for, the war in Gaza ranked very highly, but then they align with their party voters on other issues. Okay. Here you have Muslims are more likely to rank the war in Gaza as a priority at 35% compared to 10% of Jews in the survey. And then with all other groups, it was 3 to 4%. So this was the first time we saw Muslims really unifying across on an issue. But I want to show you how they compare in terms of other general public Harris voters. For Muslim Harris supporters, the top 3 policy priorities were the economy, then healthcare, then the war in Gaza. So that was at 22% when you break it down by Muslims who voted for Harris. For Harris supporters in the general public, it was 43% said preserving democracy, 43% said the economy, and then 28% said healthcare. So we can see the differences in this election. For Trump, for Muslim Trump supporters, the top three policy priorities were the economy at 32%. They ranked the war in Gaza as number 2, 30%, and then taxes at 27%. Among those in the general public who voted for Trump, the top three policy priorities were securing the border, the economy, and then immigration reform. And then we don't have enough general public third-party voters, but what you can see here is this seems to be mobilizing those who voted for a third party, because 78% of Muslims who voted for another candidate expressed the war in Gaza as their top priority, and then followed by the economy and then keeping the US out of foreign wars. Civic engagement. What we see is that for the first time since 2018, satisfaction with the country's direction among American Muslims has declined. So you see that has fallen from 48% to 23% in 2025. Now, mind you, we did the survey between April and May, so what would it be right now? The satisfaction is also significantly lower than in 2017, where it was 41%, when Trump was also in office and campaigned on overtly anti-Muslim rhetoric. In 2025, about 1/5, 21% of American Muslims approved of the way Donald Trump was handling his job. This is on par with Jews at 17% and the non-affiliated, but it's lower than Protestants, Catholics, and white evangelicals in this country. Following the same trend seen in the satisfaction with the direction of the country, Muslim presidential approval dropped sharply in 2025 compared to 2022. So you're seeing it's on trend. Muslims overall are not satisfied with the way the country is going. But Muslims were more civically engaged than most other groups in 2025. 22% were, it's less likely than Jews, but more likely than the general public to contact their federal elected representatives. They were also at 19% less likely than Jews to contact a local official, but on par with Catholics, Protestants, white evangelicals, and the non-affiliated. So, even with people saying don't vote, uncommitted on during the primary, this is an example of Muslims calling their federal official, calling their local official, getting more civically engaged. In 2025, 22% of Muslims, more likely than the general public, contacted their federally elected representative. So we see that it's increased for Muslims and decreased for the general public between 2019 and 2025. Okay, support for Trump policies. The majority, we found, of Muslims and the majority of Muslims oppose all of Trump policies, and most Trump policies are supported by less than half of all Americans we surveyed. Okay. Now, these were at the time that the survey was fielded, so tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China, termination of DEI mandates, the creation of DOJ, expansion of immigration enforcement and ICE, deportation of students who participated in the protests, cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, and recognition of two sexes. For all religious groups, there was less than 50% support for Trump policies, except white evangelicals, who were over 50% for everything except for two: cutting Medicaid and Medicare and the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, which is very interesting. The other exception was recognizing gender as male and female, where more than half of Muslims, 52%, supported it. The majority of Catholics, 53%, Protestants, 65%, and white evangelicals at 84%. So just to note that this is not just Muslims. That is, this is where we see support. So further research is needed on this, but given that what we see, more Muslim men voted for Trump than women, Muslim men are more likely than Muslim women to support Trump policies. Also of note is that the majority of Americans, including Trump supporters, oppose the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. So I just want to show you this quickly. Less than 50% of Trump voters supported the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, and Trump voters in the general public, it was 39%. Muslim Trump voters was 46%. They're actually statistically on par with one another. Okay, the last few slides I'm going to go through are what we found a little bit on Islamophobia and discrimination. So for those of you who are familiar with our poll, we have a measure to calculate where people fall on the Islamophobia index. These are the questions that they're asked. If Muslims are more prone to violence, if Muslims discriminate against women, if they're hostile to the United States, less civilized than other people, and then the one that I love is that they're responsible for acts another Muslim conducts. So what we found is that this has increased in 2025. This is a big chart. It's all in the report. You can look into it. But the jump that I want you to note is that among the general population, it went from 25 to 33. Jews had a very small increase from 17 to 19. Protestants rose 7 points from 23 to 30, and Muslims decreased on it. So we see that it has jumped. It jumped 15 points for white evangelicals and 12 points for Catholics. Islamophobia, the higher you rank on the Islamophobia index, the higher support people had for Trump policy. So it's not surprising, actually. And this is something that to note that we've shown in past polls, that the higher somebody ranks on the Islamophobia index, the more likely they are to hold anti-democratic attitudes in the United States. We actually have another study on popular culture in the media that shows that when Muslims look at or the general population looks at negative representations of Muslims in the media, the more likely they are to support anti-democratic policies in the United States. And then just to show that Muslims are the group that is the most likely to experience discrimination at 63%, with Jews following at 50%. But something that you might might be a little surprised at, because we've heard a lot of experiences of hate crimes, discrimination, and whatnot, but this is relatively unchanged since 2016. It's actually staying pretty stable. But I just want you to know, 63% is a high number. That's a high percentage of when a population says they're experiencing discrimination. So I'm ending with this. I want you to stay tuned because we have more. There's so much more in the poll. Please check it out. Topics from the Muslim that will be coming out in 2026: interfaith engagement, impacts on caregiving of aging adults, mental health of Muslim adults and youth, and student experiences. Please use our QR code to find the report. Stay connected. Here is our social media, and then I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing our moderator today for the panel discussion. So thank you so much for taking some time to hear me out. I know it's a lot. It's a lot to go through in a very short amount of time. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our moderator today. Mehdi Hasan is an award-winning British-American journalist, broadcaster, and author. He is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of the new media company Zeteo. Please pay attention to what Zeteo is publishing. Mehdi is also a Guardian columnist, host of Head to Head on Al Jazeera English, and the best-selling author of Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. He previously worked as an anchor at MSNBC and columnist for The Intercept. We are very honored to have you today here to moderate our panel for us. Thank you. We have a chair for you. It's coming up here.
Take the middle.
No, you got a chair for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And to go on our panelists to come up. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
We have names.
You could do better than that. Assalamu alaikum. I get it. We've had shawarmas and slides. Now it's time for a little nap, right? No napping. We've got lots of good stuff to talk about, lots of thought-provoking discussions to be had after those slides. Thank you, Saher, for that fantastic presentation, some of it quite scary. I think it's fair to say. I will give you props for finding a photo of a black man wearing a MAGA hat. That was a great moment there. That was, whoever that guy is, good luck to him. Let me introduce our panelists. We're going to have a discussion for about 40 minutes and then open up to the audience and take your questions. We have Layla Elabed, is the organizing director for Arab Americans for Progress, director of Listen to Michigan. She, of course, served as a co-founder of the Uncommitted National Movement in 2024. Nabilah Islam Parkes is a Georgia state senator. is the youngest woman ever elected to the Georgia State Senate. She's also the first Muslim woman and the first South Asian woman elected to the State Senate, lifelong organizer. That deserves applause for sure. Salima Suswell is founder and CEO of the Black Muslim Leadership Council, an entrepreneur, a political strategist, an organizer, a community leader. Saher, we already met, is here, ISPU's Director of Research, expert on racialization, not radicalization. And of course, Dalia Mogahed, who should need no introduction at an event like this, scholar at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, former Director of Research here. She and I have done these discussions many a time. We were just reminiscing. Pre-pandemic, we did panels like this. She's also the co-author of the book Who Speaks for Islam. Everyone knows her very well. Pleasure to have you here. Times are bad. I think you ended with Islamophobia and discrimination, Sarah. I don't think anyone in this room was shocked to see that those numbers have gone up, especially post-October the 7th. I just spent the last 24 hours dealing with multiple Republicans online, including a sitting member of Congress, saying that I should be deported for being a Muslim in this country. So that's where we are, like literally right now in the real world. So Dalia, let me start with you, since you've been looking over these things for years. You can actually give us a historical context when it comes to polling. When you look at these slides and these stats, what jumps out to you compared to the polls you oversaw in the past?
Thank you so much, Mehdi, and it's such a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this. I really needed to take time after analyzing this data. I was talking to my husband that this data, I need therapy after looking at this data. Because a lot has gone down, a lot has gone wrong. The first thing that really stuck out to me is how high the Islamophobia index has gone. It's higher than it was during the previous Trump administration, especially among groups that used to appear to be very close allies like Hispanic Americans. So we didn't go through in the presentation, there wasn't enough time to go into the details, but not only has the Islamophobia index gone up measurably and considerably among, say, white evangelicals, but it's gone up among whites in general and among Hispanics in general, which is really shocking because it used to be that Latino Americans had the lowest measure of the Islamophobia index, and we see this huge jump. So that was one thing that was very alarming.
Not a huge jump amongst Jewish Americans, which
might
surprise people. We might think after October 7th, Jews and Muslims hate each other even more, but it's actually white evangelicals that had the biggest 15-point jump.
The highest religious group that went up in Islamophobia was white evangelicals, and Jewish Americans barely changed. So that was that's something very important thing to understand, and it's also important to look at when you look at issues that relate to Palestine or Palestinian rights. Muslims and Jews are on par in their level of support or lack thereof of Trump policies that target Palestinian advocacy. So I think that these kinds of things dispel some myths and really fly in the face of conventional wisdom regarding what this conflict is really about, and it's about a political division. The other thing to understand is, we looked at what are the drivers of Islamophobia, and they're very political. You voted for Trump, conservative points of view, and things like that. What doesn't appear is religious devotion across faiths. So being more religious, even being more religious as a white evangelical, does not drive Islamophobia. It is a political, not a religious driven sentiment. Now, in better news, I do want to still point, I'm an eternal optimist. Things that have gone up that are good are Muslim civic engagement. I mean, we haven't seen a single group that has increased in their voter registration as much as Muslims since 2016. So 25-point increase is huge, from 60% to 85%. So everyone that's been working on civic engagement, increasing civic engagement, it's working. And people are now on Muslim voter registration on par with the public, and it didn't used to be the case.
Do you think, Sarah made a very good point, that when you had the number of Muslim Biden voters from 2020 who did not vote for Biden, about 10% went to Trump, but a big chunk just stayed at home. Well, not stayed at home, they just didn't vote for president. There were a lot of Muslims, I'm sure people in this room, who voted down ballot but just left the top empty.
Yeah.
So you're still registering to vote, you're still turning out to vote, you just chose in the heat of 2024 not to cast a vote in the presidential election. Is that fair?
That's absolutely true, but unfortunately that, according to our research, only 3%. Only 3% of Muslims voted but didn't vote for president.
So then
of those who
So then the chunk who stayed at home, they stayed at home then? Is that number
they
by
stayed at
vote?
home. There was a big chunk that did stay at home that was active before, but they are still registered. They're just not choosing to participate.
Sarah, can I just bring you back in briefly and ask one thing that was missing from the slides on the Trump voters, which I thought was fascinating. You had the reasons they voted for Trump. You had taxes, border security, economy and job creation, Gaza. Can't remember what the other two were. What was missing were the letters LGBTQ.
Yeah.
And I feel like people in this room who are Muslim know lots of Muslims who were already heading towards Trump pre-October 7th, pre-Gaza genocide, in places like Dearborn, Michigan even, where we saw lots of protests over school boards and books on the curriculum. Did that come up in your plan? Was that a deliberate choice to leave that out?
It doesn't come up as a top priority. It's not even close to a top priority.
So your state just didn't make those top 6?
It doesn't make the top. It doesn't make so it's, you know, I'm not.
Anecdotally, it makes the top 3 for every Muslim I know who likes them.
That's what they're offered. Their top choices, and it's not coming up compared to all these other issues. So it's not. It's surprising, but that's what we found. And even with we have an election survey from 2024 in 3 swing states, doesn't come up as what they're going to vote as a top priority.
Let me bring in Layla as our Michigan/uncommitted voice. You were on the ground last year. You spoke to a lot of people across the state and outside of the state, including Arabs, Muslims, progressives in general. Just give us a sense of, number one, were people tilting away from the Democratic Party even before October the 7th in places like Michigan? I'm talking about Muslim voters. And secondly, we saw in the polling, I was fascinated by the polling that showed amongst Harris voters, the economy was top, Gaza was second, even amongst Muslim voters. Like, for how many people did they say Gaza is the top issue? But some people confuse that because Gaza can be your top issue, but not your only issue.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I often had said, even in the very beginning of Listen to Michigan, when we launched the Vote Uncommitted in our state during the primary, was the fact that we knew that voters who were likely to vote for Trump in 2024 voted for him in 2020. And the genocide was not a deciding factor. Like, we were already saying that.
That was baked in. Some of them.
Yes. And what we saw, and I think the data reflects this, is that the majority of people where Gaza was a top issue, because we didn't see the shift that was necessary from the Democratic Party, from the Harris campaign, is a lot of folks stayed home. And not just Muslims. There's data out there that shows a lot of folks who voted for Biden in 2020 didn't vote for Kamala Harris in 2024, not because they voted for somebody else, but because they just stayed at home. And we're very disillusioned with the process.
While I've got you on this topic, I've got to ask, Kamala Harris has a book out. She's doing a book tour. She's got a memoir. Very interesting, the bit in the book where she says, oh, we saw polls now that showed that Gaza was the top issue in swing states. I'm like, you saw that now?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Layla and Abbas were telling you that to your face in the summer of 2024. What do you make of that kind of
it was,
hindsight admission from the former vice president?
It was really, really frustrating because the narrative that we were...
You're going to say another F word there. It's going to be equally appropriate. Yes.
It was really frustrating because the narrative that we were pushing from February was that we're not anti-Democrats. We're actually, it's really interesting because the data that we have from Listen to Michigan was that we had a 45% propensity of first-time voters who were voting uncommitted, which was, we were getting young people on campus registered to the vote for the very first time and were casting their vote for uncommitted. But we were saying, not just to the Harris campaign, but we were saying in the media, this is a big issue, especially in a swing state like Michigan. And then when we got 13% of the vote, over 100,000 Michigan voters to vote uncommitted, we were like, okay, is this not a sign that the Democratic Party needs to shift on this policy? And it was just, it just felt like we were screaming into a void. And even when me and Abbas had the opportunity to meet with Vice President Kamala Harris in Detroit at the Detroit Metro Airport during a photo lineup opportunity, I spoke directly to the vice president and said, my community, the people that I'm on the ground with, who I'm talking to, actually wanted to be able to vote, for Kamala Harris. This, Dearborn, especially Southeast Michigan, Muslim and Arab voters, traditionally vote Democrat. I come from a Democratic family. I always talked about my dad being a UAW member, and like really instilling in all of us kids, like vote Democrat. As soon as we turned 18, register to vote, and you're always going to vote for a Democrat. And that story is not, many other of my friends and people that I've talked to, same story, always voted for Democrats. And
do you think those, just to go back to Saher's
yeah.
slide where she talked about 2020 versus 2024, if we have an election in 2028, do you think those Muslim voters are coming back? Are they recoverable, or are they gone for good?
I think that it's going to be very telling what happens in municipal elections and statewide elections. If our community, not just our community, but I think if communities that felt ignored and silenced in this last election continued to be silenced and ignored by Democrats, or like almost feeling like used, that they are going to be disillusioned. I don't know if they're going to move more towards the right or towards Republicans, or they just might say, you know what, I don't believe in the political process anymore. I mean, I was hearing that when I was getting signatures for my sister's petition when she was running for Congress prior to this last election, that people were just like, I'm not Muslims and Arab Muslims who were like, I'm disillusioned with the process.
For people who don't know who your sister is.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. So I think it was very, very frustrating. I was there to tell Vice President Kamala Harris that, like, my community wants to be able to vote for you. They want to be able to vote for you. Please meet with us. Meet with the community members that had lost family members. 2 days before my meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, or the photo lineup, I had talked to 2 community members who had lost over 100 members of their family in Gaza each. And I was, had expressed that, and one thing that I always say during that interaction is I do believe the vice president's empathy was real and genuine. And I think that, she did say, I do want to meet with you guys. Let's talk about meeting. And then the very next day.
She says in the book that she pleaded with Joe Biden to show empathy to Palestinians in the way he did to Ukrainians. She doesn't explain why she then didn't do that.
Right.
Once she took over the campaign, there's a hilarious bit, I don't know if you've seen the bit in the book, where she says, it was very tough to give this speech on Gaza. I had to walk a real tightrope at the DNC. People were angry from all sides. But the Washington Post says I gave a great speech.
Well,
that's what she says in the
15
book.
minutes after that interaction, she went on stage and reprimanded students who were there,
Yes, I remember.
who were just there advocating to save lives.
We all remember that.
Yeah.
Sadly. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. What's fascinating in the slides is Gaza's a huge issue, but it's not the only issue. The economy and job creation is massive. Healthcare, unsurprisingly in this country with ridiculous healthcare, is massive. Nabilah, you are a state senator. You're not dealing with foreign policy in your day job. You're dealing with people's domestic, everyday concerns, like healthcare. When you're in Georgia knocking on doors, when you're coming across Muslim voters, is that what's reflected, what you're seeing in the polling?
Well, as we know, the Muslim voters are not a monolith. Yep. And so I would say that, let's say with Arabs and South Asians, like Gaza was a top issue. With black voters, I would hear more about healthcare, economic policy, racism. And so as a state senator, I do deal with, helping people get their Medicaid, their SNAP benefits. And that is a concern then, and it is now. And what we're seeing with the Trump administration cutting about $1 trillion in Medicaid money. When it comes to the economy, we've seen about 1 million jobs be cut so far, the highest since 2020. And so there is economic anxiety right now, and it was an economic anxiety then, and I'm hoping that these what we'd call them like off-year elections, we see a dramatic turnout on people who come out and vote against a lot of these policies that are hurting working families.
You mentioned Muslims not being a monolith, and I'm thinking, Salima, about how race is at the core of everything in America, above religion, above partisanship. And what this poll shows is that a racially diverse Muslim community, I think, just looking at the numbers, 76% of black Muslims voted for Kamala Harris, 38% of white Muslims voted for Kamala Harris, 50% of Asian Muslims. And it's kind of like, even when it comes to Muslims in an intense year where everyone's talking about genocide in Gaza, even the Muslim population breaks down along American-style race lines, with the white folks going right-wing, the black folks staying loyal to the Democratic Party in a random sense. Like, race is at the core of a lot of this, more than religion.
Absolutely. Absolutely, race is at the core of it. So last year, in 2024, a lot of us were advocating to ensure that Harris won because we felt that her policies were closest to what we needed as a community. And so, as we have already stated, obviously Gaza was at the forefront for all of us last year. But it wasn't the only thing. Again, as we have stated, the community is not a monolith. And so with 28%, which estimated 28%, it arguably could be more, of percent of the American Muslim community, the largest proportion being African American, you would think that some of these issues around economic equity and healthcare and affordable housing and even criminal justice reform and public safety, in cities where I'm from, like Philadelphia, last year even, there was a mass shooting at an Eid celebration, in Philadelphia. And so that is a reality for Black Muslims, who often live in the same areas under the same socioeconomic conditions. And sometimes it kind of feels that the greater Muslim community is overlooking some of those domestic policy issues.
Because the greater Muslim community is also ignoring the fact that race is at the core of a lot of our political divisions, and imagining that some kind of religious bond overcomes race. And pretty much nothing in America seems to overcome race, not party affiliation, not religion, not age. It goes through the core. Just to check, Sarah, how many Muslims do we think, according to your poll, voted for Trump? Remind us, 31? What percentage? And what was it in 2020?
2020, we don't have that number up.
Do we have a comparator? So we don't know if it went up or down.
It was around mid-20s.
So it definitely went up. So it definitely went up. Post-insurrection and criminal convictions, it went up. So that's about 1 in 3 Muslims voted for Donald Trump. So if you're in this room, look to your left or right. One of you voted for Donald Trump.
Can I just add one thing quick? We did have somebody who was supposed to be on the panel, Rabi Al-Chowdhury, who had to back out at the last minute, who was going to speak about Trump Muslims.
I was very sad to see him back out. I was looking forward
he was supposed to be
to the Muslim Trump supporter on the panel.
Yeah.
There's more than one in the audience. Don't worry, I've clocked all of you. Let me come back to Dalia and ask you a question about what we ended up the panel discussion, the slideshow on the slides, the Islamophobia. You and I first spoke, I think 2000, I want to say 9, 10, when you were on the religious advisory board to Obama, so it would have been 08, 9. Yeah. And I interviewed you at the time about Islamophobia, Barack Obama. I was at New Statesman in the UK. That was itself 7 years after 9/11. We're now a quarter of a century after 9/11. I have only lived in the US 10 years, but I've been visiting the US since 1998. Would you agree, this is my view, and I don't know, we can open up, audience will come in later, that the Islamophobia we're seeing now, not just statistically in terms of the index, but just everyday occurrences, is much worse than anything we've seen in the last 25 years. It's post 9/11 on steroids.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that, and at the same time, somehow there's also a group within the general public that's very positive towards Muslims as a direct result of the genocide in Gaza that didn't exist before. So there's almost more of a polarization.
Yeah.
Whereas before, there was Islamophobia and then just like at best neutrality, but nobody was pro. No one was like making videos defending us or talking about why the Quran was cool. Like that didn't exist. So there's this strange reality.
So people have become more anti in one area, but more pro in another.
Yeah. But the percentage of people who are more anti is higher than it used to be.
And,
absolutely.
And as a cheerleader in government.
and has a cheerleader in government.
I mean, it is weird to think about this, but after 9/11, before he went and killed thousands of people, George W. Bush went to a mosque in Washington, D.C., in the city, and said, Islam is peace. God forbid there were a terrorist attack by a Muslim in the coming weeks or months. Does anyone here think Donald Trump would go to a mosque and say Islam? I don't think so. Do you think he'd go to an American Muslim mosque the day after a terrorist attack or 2 days and say Islam is peace?
I mean, he's bringing the Muslims to his platform even now. Just recently.
You didn't answer my question. Do you think he would go to an American mosque in the 24 or 48 hours after a terrorist attack by a Muslim and say Islam is peace?
If he's invited, at this point, I think.
Wow. We'll have to agree to disagree.
We just don't engage with the Republican administration.
Layla, let's talk about the Democrats, since it's easy to take shots at the Republicans. You have a Muslim candidate running in New York for mayor.
Yes.
He's won the Democratic primary by a landslide. He has yet to be endorsed by the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, who is a New York Senator Chuck Schumer, or by the leader of the Democrats in the House, who is a New York House member, Hakeem Jeffries. Is the Democratic Party getting worse, not better on this issue post-2024? I mean, the leadership, not the
right. Yeah, and this is like something that mirrors what is happening in Michigan right now with our own elections. Like we have really great Muslim candidates running for office that are not being supported by the Democratic Party. And still, the fact that any Democrat that we are able to move and mobilize around the genocide or saying something condemning the genocide is still met with kind of, this fear and hesitation. I've been working on a House bill with some of our state reps in Michigan to say something about an arms embargo, to reinstate medical visas to Palestinians. And they're being met with their Democratic caucus with so much hesitation. And for me, somebody who's been organizing the last 2 years around this, it is almost like, have you guys not learned your lesson yet? What is it going to take? What is it going to take? Because all you are doing is driving voters who are already feeling this disillusionment, you are driving them further away. And I think that if one of the things many things that the Democrats have to do, but they really need to go back to their base. And that is something that we tried during Uncommitted to reinforce that 70% at that time, it was 70% of the base of Democrats who were opposing what was happening in Gaza, who wanted to see an arms embargo. Yet you would have never thought that the way that the leadership of the Democratic Party proceeded.
Salima, you and I were at an event in Philly pre the election last year. And I remember in the audience Q&A, the standard line that I heard from Muslim Americans across the country when I was traveling across the US last year was, we must vote against the Democrats, whether it's Stein, Trump, stay at home, to teach them a lesson. Because when they lose, they'll realize how they messed up and they'll change. And I kind of laughed when people said that because that was hopelessly naive. And I think we've seen that now. This is a party whose leaders not only didn't listen to Layla and the Uncommitted, not only didn't look at the polling and see how badly they did in places like Michigan, but are happy to jump on an anti-hate campaign against the only Muslim running for mayor in our lifetimes. Kirsten Gillibrand falsely claimed that he talked about global jihad, like outrageous thing. To this day, she's not apologized publicly. What do you say to Muslims who are, we saw from Saher Selod, we saw from the ISPU data, are very engaged in politics? These are not people who are now just minding their own business, ignore it. They're engaged. They're registering to vote. They're talking about politics, turning up to events like this. But what do you say to them in terms of strategy? How do you talk about strategy with Muslim Americans based on the evidence we have?
That's a really important question. I think, first of all, you have to go into the strategy knowing that you have to continue to do the work. You have to continue to engage. Civic participation is absolutely paramount to establishing change for our communities. So not showing up is obviously not the option. In terms of strategy, I don't have the whole strategy, figured out, but I will say education is really important, educating folks and pointing them into the right direction for understanding how to make decisions about policies, civic education.
I mean, Americans in general, not just
Americans in general. I think that there are far too many of us that simply do not understand the way politics work, the way civics work. And I think that education, so all of the organizations that are out there that engages the CARES and, the organizations that are out there doing the work to mobilize the community and educate them on the process, so many folks just don't know how to even make a decision or what these candidates do. And I think the strategy has to start locally. I think that we have to recognize that presidential elections happen every 4 years, but there are local elections that really, really make a difference as to how we live our lives and shape how our tax dollars are spent, and the way our states are run. I think investing in education has to be the beginning point for this strategy and helping the community to understand why politics impacts their lives.
Sarah, do we have any data on Muslim political engagement outside of presidential elections?
Yeah, so it's they're calling their elected officials, local officials, federal elected attending town halls, although I wonder if there's if we should be thinking about how are people engaging. Is it going to a town hall? Is it social media, things like that? And that's really a measure of how engaged Muslims are.
I want to also, I'm sorry, Nabilah, just really quickly, I want to also add, clearly we have some folks in our community that are friendly with the Trump administration, and we should be talking to those folks, and we should be ensuring that they're carrying our community's messaging to the Trump administration. We have to work across the aisle if we want to get things changed.
When you're a Muslim candidate, you're otherized, and I feel like Democratic Party leadership is missing the mark when it comes to Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries by not endorsing someone like Mamdani. When you can vote for a Charlie Kirk resolution but not the Democratic nominee in New York, it says that you're not listening to your base. I think that's very problematic, and so we have a lot of work to do in terms of getting our party to recognize that someone like Mamdani or Ghazala Hashmi, who hopefully will win the lieutenant governor's race in Virginia, we are mainstream Americans and we should be embraced.
Nabilah, let me ask you this while I've got you. How bad has the Democratic Party's reputation gotten with some Muslims that wherever I go now, the first audience question in every event I go to is, what do you think about Marjorie Taylor Greene? Isn't she great? And you're from Georgia. So I feel like you should tell us about Marjorie Taylor Greene's new Muslim MTG alliance.
Look, Marjorie Taylor Greene has unabashedly been herself. She's a racist. She's come for the Muslim community over and over again. She tweeted about a picture of a niqab on the Statue of Liberty when Mamdani won became the Democratic nominee. I would say trusting these folks is hard. Based on their massive history of just being Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, and we should be very guarded about, how we formulate these relationships and if they are going to be true allies to the Muslim community. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is still the same person. Look, I'm glad she's come, is the first Republican to, say something about the genocide, and she's talking about these healthcare subsidies. We need more Republicans across the nation doing that. But what did Maya Angelou say what's the saying?
Someone showed you who they are.
Yeah, there you go, yeah. That one. So
Has she reached out to you?
No, she has not. And I don't think Muslim Americans should be, flocking to her when she hasn't shown a lot of good measures to prove that she should be trustworthy.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Stick your hands up. Please ask a question, not give a speech. Do we need microphones, or anyone can just go? Just project your voice. Let's start with the gentleman there in the second row. Yes. Yes, you. Yes, you.
Hi. I think, Dalia, you mentioned one of the positive signs of the results of this year's poll was that Muslim civic engagement has increased since 2016. I'm curious if that's also related to the fact that the Muslim community is the youngest religious group. Mm-hmm. Is it because there are now a lot more Gen Z people that have started voting? So I'm curious if that assumption is true or not.
You want to take it, or you want me to?
I can start. So I guess my short answer is I'm not sure, but I will tell you that Muslim young people remain the least likely age group to vote among Muslims. So very similar to their generational cohorts, they aren't registering to vote as much as middle-aged and older Muslims. So it leads me to think that perhaps that's not the reason, but you're absolutely right. Lots and lots of Muslims have reached the voting age over the past like 10 years.
I'll just add, that's true. I wanted to make sure that data point that they're not the group that's the highest registered to vote. But on the flip side, we had a conference out here in DC when I first started at ISPU, and I've never seen so many young Muslims majoring in political science. So look around at what we have going on. So there's something going on too.
All right.
Next question.
We're going to give a microphone to some lady in the back.
Yeah, just pass it around.
Hi, this question, can you hear me?
No. Not really, but project your voice a bit.
So this question is a little bit controversial. I'm always the type of person to ask about the elephant in the room. I'm wondering, how will the Muslim community reckon with the fact that the LGBT community has been the one that has been leading the pro-Palestine movement locally and in universities? So I'm part of these groups, I won't specify which ones, and a large majority of these people are within that community, and they're Muslim supporters. How will Muslims kind of reckon?
I'm going to send that one to Layla.
Thanks. It's really interesting because we saw this during the Muslim ban, during Trump's administration, when there was protests at airports in support of Muslims and against the Muslim ban. The folks who were on the forefront were people from the LGBTQ community. And I want to also, this is something that what you guys were discussing, Dalia and Mehdi, was the fact that another demographic that is on the front lines of these, especially the school encampments, are Jewish brothers and sisters. So some of that data was like not surprising to me because we've seen these folks at the forefront. And I do think this is something that we're going to have to reconcile with. I mean, I was there in I'm from Dearborn, Michigan, and I was there when all that book ban stuff was happening, and you had folks infiltrating white nationalists, white Christian nationalists infiltrating our communities, Moms for Liberty, all of that coming to Michigan, coming to our Dearborn schools. I mean, we had the governor candidate, the Republican candidate for governor at our Dearborn school board, which was like, why are you here? What I do have to say, I actually don't believe, at least this is my observation, and I don't have data to back this up. Hopefully, inshallah, God willing, we will, that the majority, at least I can say for Dearborn, the majority of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are not, anti-LGBTQ. It's that we have the loudest folks. We have, the media is watching all of us. And this is something that I pointed out when, our Dearborn Heights mayor and the mayor of Hamtramck endorsed Trump. I'm sure there was mayors across the United States that also endorsed Trump, but those were the two that made national media. And it's the same thing what we're seeing with the LGBTQ community, and why a local school board and the book ban. I'm sure there's been all kinds of anti-LGBTQ book bans across the United States, but that was the one that was highlighted in the national media that I also think gives into why we're seeing a rise in Islamophobia as well.
You said you have, before I come to you, you
Yeah.
said you don't have data. Sarah, do you have data? We had I saw the one poll finding, which was majority of Muslims. Remind us what that question was, which was in line with every, on gender. But that's specifically on transgender. Do we have a broader issue on, I don't know, gay marriage?
Yeah, we haven't asked that specific question, but it's not a high policy priority for Muslims, although they ranked at 53%. When asked that, all groups did, but it's not a high policy priority. The one thing I'll say as a former professor, and to this question that you asked, younger Muslims, I think we're seeing a shift for younger Muslims who are on college campuses and are in coalition like you're talking about. So I think to your point, it's what does the media fixate on versus what's the actual happening on the ground.
Just, to protect our rights, we're already a marginalized community, and we have to build coalitions. As a state senator, I proudly support the LGBTQ community. And, when I tell folks that might be on the iffy side of supporting our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, is that, look, we need to protect their civil rights because they're going to come for our civil rights, and they are. So it takes a village to protect all of us together, because we are all marginalized communities, and as we've seen, they march with us as well.
Okay, let's go back to the audience. So one of the themes that it seems like comes out of this poll is a sort of disillusionment with with Biden and the Biden-Harris campaign, and more broadly, sort of with the sort of political establishment. And I feel like some of the conversation that we've had after, since then, it sort of highlights that. I wonder, one of the things that we were talking about was this idea of, like, can we trust Marjorie Taylor Greene, or can we trust Republicans on this or that? And I wonder, is trust the right measure? Like, is that what we should be looking for if we're talking about our political allies and, like, who we can or can't support? Is the question, can we trust Harris versus Taylor Greene versus this, or is there some other metric? Do we have aligned tool in this moment? Are they valuable for this or that or the other? And I just said, because a number of you are very involved specifically in the political arena. So I just
do you have a specific metric you should replace that metric?
I don't. I mean, this is sort of I don't. I'm a little skeptical of trust.
Interesting.
But I'm open to
Salima.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that, because I actually don't think you need to trust, and I don't think you should expect that you can trust any of these politicians. Sitting next to I'm sorry.
You can trust
me. You can trust in the village. She's the only one. But in terms of what I mean, though, is that you should have a relationship with these elected officials in which you're able to leverage or position yourself to impact policy that they sponsor, policy that they have the power to control. And so what I mean by not trusting them is that it's not about necessarily trusting them. It's about being able to deliver change for on behalf of your community. And I always tell folks, don't worry about trusting these folks. They're not your friends. Can you work with them? Can you influence them to establish change that works best for your family and your community? That's I think the goal.
Well, also the data show we're not a party loyalty dense group. Like, we vote on issues. So if we're gonna let's continue to speak on the issues that people want to vote for.
Let's go to our Trump supporting friend in the audience.
Yeah, my question is to Dalia Mogahed. It's about the rise of the Islamophobia. So, and you mentioned it's political, but if you look into the factors behind this political big umbrella, for me, because President Trump, he changed from 2016 to 2020 to 24 actually. So he gave platform to Muslims, and Democrats did not. Imams and others, he praised Muslims, and he has consistently been praising Muslims up until recently. I just saw a recent social media post that he's like, Muslims voted for me. He recognizes, he's happy about it. He likes it. But for me, it's like the people like Mamdani, far left, campus protests, like just breaking border kind of things. That's what I'm seeing in my surroundings. People also are seeing Muslims as this far left, and so on. So then, for me, that might be the reason for the rise in Islamophobia. Same as anti-Semitism with Israel's actions, associated. So, for Hamas and other terrorist groups, what they are doing. Because in Japan, Islamophobia also increased, and other parts of the world, Islamophobia increased. So I can't explain this with President Trump at this time. And how do you explain this? What are the political factors behind this rise of Islamophobia? Thank you.
Before you answer that, just a quick question to you. What did you think of the slide that showed the people with the highest Islamophobia are Trump supporters?
Yeah, because it's just this is how you define Islamophobia. You just came up with some certain measures. It's your index.
I didn't. It's not mine.
I mean, that's whatever. So it's because it's already subjective because they have their own ranking and just yes and no, and then okay, you are Islamophobe. Like
there's a whole body of literature about racialization.
So I find it very political too.
So I'll answer the question. So the way we measure Islamophobia is by asking people to tell us the degree to which they agree with 5 Islamophobic ideas. Those 5 Islamophobic ideas, we chose them not out of thin air, but because these are the 5 ideas that other researchers have shown predict support for anti-Muslim policies, like even as excluding Muslims from voting, going to war against Muslim countries. So there are anti-Muslim policies that these attitudes predict support for. So the 5 that we chose to put into the Islamophobic index come from that. They are empirically linked to agreeing with bad policies, okay? So when you look at the Islamophobia index, people who are highest on it also are most likely to have voted for Trump. And people who are highest on it are most likely to endorse anti-democratic ideas. So it's not about.
That's not my question.
I think your question is it because people who are Islamophobic see Muslims as being, I've heard this before, being liberal or being leftist or being used by the left or being Marxists, and so they don't like us because we're Marxists. That is not what the Islamophobia index implies, because the Islamophobia index measures anti-Muslim stereotypes that have nothing to do with being leftist. It doesn't say most Muslims are Marxists. It says most Muslims are violent, misogynistic, are guilty of crimes they didn't commit by other Muslims, are less civilized, so it looks at dehumanization, right, and are against the United States. So they're not inherently leftist-leaning stereotypes. They're stereotypes that are just classic Islamophobic ideas.
But like when you see Mamdani speaking about those things, campuses like disruption of the campuses and around, then of course people will link those to, Muslims are doing this, so they are like violent, anti-American, you know what I mean? So those things might be linked in each other.
Do you know who Laura Loomer is?
Yeah, I know. I saw her.
What do you think about her views?
I mean, I don't have to just share my opinion, but just.
I'm just wondering what you think of her views.
I mean, like, I think
they're Islamophobic,
there
right?
are extremes on both sides. Like, also, I don't think it's good to pick on her and just go fight.
But she's an ally of the president that you support. I was just wondering.
No, Muslim allies too, so he has all kinds of allies.
But he's allied with people who hate Muslims.
He's allied with everybody, so.
I kind of want to just say a couple things. Like, these anti-Muslim policies that we don't think about are counterterrorism laws and policies like the no-fly list, and these are based off of these tropes, for example. But I think to the point, if I'm hearing you, is that you feel like this party has listened to. That's something that got brought up, is that for some Muslims, and it's been brought up here, that Democrats stopped listening. And even if Trump is at the same time, or Marjorie Taylor Greene is espousing Islamophobic views, he still makes some Muslims feel like he's listening.
So on that note, briefly before we go back to the audience, Layla, you and I were talking about the green room about this.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Is Trump getting a pass? So for example, a lot of Muslims justifiably complained, as I was one of them, I was there with you, at the DNC when Harris and the DNC refused to put a Palestinian on stage. What's interesting is no one even made that request at the RNC. It wasn't even a consideration.
Yeah.
Is Trump being graded on a curve by Muslims like he is by a lot of other people?
I mean, I can't really answer that because, again, I can't answer for all Muslims. But what I can say for personally me, who's, like I said, since I've been able to vote, I've always voted for a Democrat. I can't come from a staunch Democratic family. My sister's a Democrat, and she always gets asked, "Oh, why don't you leave the party?" Especially now, and she always has a great response. Is like, "Why should I leave the party? I represent the values of the Democratic Party." Yeah. Those other people should leave the Democratic Party. So I don't know exactly how to answer this question.
But this idea that Sarah mentioned about being listened to, that is,
yeah.
Donald Trump met with people in Dearborn, Harris didn't.
Yeah, and I think it's because so many of us have a history of voting for Democrats that we hope, and it goes back to your question of trust, is accountability, is largely when we look at especially Dearborn, overwhelmingly supported Biden in 2020. We were promised by the Biden campaign that we wouldn't suffer the same Islamophobic, anti-Arab hate that we experienced under the Trump administration with like the Muslim ban and all of that rhetoric. So overwhelmingly, we supported Biden, only to in 2023 for Biden to overwhelmingly, send weapons to Israel to kill our people. So I think it's accountability. We thought that the Democratic Party establishment was accountable to us, and we learned that they weren't.
All right, we've got 8 minutes left. I'm going to take 3 questions at once, and then we're going to wrap. So let us go. The gentleman here has been waiting for a while. Front row. Do you want to wait for that microphone, wherever that little mic is going around? It's fine? Okay, go for it.
So my question is about discrimination. In your report, you said 63% of Muslims have experienced discrimination. How do you gauge that? I mean, unless you're very, obviously Muslim, you're wearing a hijab, or your name is Muhammad Ali Abdullah, or you go around, with a sign and, Allah t-shirt. How do you know it's actually anti-Muslim discrimination, not just anti-immigrant or dark people?
Okay.
So do you have it broken down?
Okay, good question. We'll take another 2 and then we'll have Saher respond. I bet there's a Muhammad Ali Abdullah in the room. Let's go to the lady there and then the gentleman here.
So my question is a methodology question. I'm a researcher. I use your data, and you and CARE are the only people out there that are actually gathering this wonderful data. So thank you. I commend you for your efforts, and it's absolutely amazing. But there's not enough. I mean, how do we get this out to more than 2,800, I think it was, 2,000 and some, a little under 3,000 people? How do we attract a larger number? I talk to skeptics when I'm on my committee, in my committees at the university higher ed level, and they look at me and they say, okay, so do you have anybody else that says the same thing? People that we can trust, like maybe the Washington Post or the New York Times. And I'm like, CARE and ISPU, and I insist, and I still use your data, and I've proven my point, on your methodology. But how do we get more people involved, and how can you use me? There you go.
Okay.
I wanted to ask that question.
Gentlemen, anyone else? All right, let's take 2 more. 2 more. Brief. This one and that one, then we're done.
Thank you. The sister, I think Layla from Michigan. As an African American, I'm a senior citizen. I got involved in being an activist when I was 15 years old in high school in Georgia. Got locked up because I tried to go to the all-white library. So I have a whole 60 years of working with social justice issues. But I struggle because it seems like we were not mature during the last election. If there was one issue that we disagreed with on, neither candidate was a great choice for us. But I'm just curious as to see why you thought Donald Trump would be a better person. Let me finish my question. To be president, and with all of the things that are challenging to democracy. I think recently we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. I was there. There were hardly no arrests, but this past weekend we had thousands of people all over the country with the No Kings rally, and the president showed something with should know people. So how do you resolve that?
Okay. Give this gentleman a round of applause for 60 years of activism. Last question here.
I'll be quick. My name is Hussein Alabed from Muslim Community Network. We were talking about truth. Thank you so much for doing this poll and collecting all this data. But when it comes to empirical truth and data collection, it's not sexy. So how do we package this data and this information and this truth in order to get it to people to cut through the AI slop he's talking about, to cut through the chatbots,
Good question.
Cut through the culture wars?
Why can't Muslims make data sexy?
Can I answer the first 2 questions, and then I think maybe you could answer that question a little bit. But anyway, to the question about a Muslim, how do you know? We ask them because of their religious identity. That's what's asked on the survey. So they are responding, I am experiencing discrimination because of my religious identity. It could be because they wear the hijab. It could be because they go to an airport, their Muslim name is flagged.
But you're not specifying that. I think the gentleman wants to, you're not specifying what types of discrimination.
We do have different questions about, do you experience it with police? Yes, we have specific questions that we ask, and it's about their religious identity, not racial or ethnic.
Does the data show that more women experience it, reported, or more,
This
black
time,
Muslims or immigrant Muslims?
so it's hard. This is a really method. Sometimes cutting the data, you can't get a good statistical. So I can talk to you more about it, but we do have that breakdown in the report. Yeah. Yeah, so the N is strong, and actually we have a whole group of people over here, Dr. Shu and Dutwin, which will say, one to do, and Bashir, who works for Pew, the larger N you get, the more money it costs, actually. And so we are confident in our oversampling of Muslims and Jews that we have the right number to make these statistical, that it's statistically significant. To get more African American Muslims, do more of those breakdowns. We do need more money. We do need to expand the sample, but we're very confident with our numbers. But Pew has a survey that they've done in 2017 was the last one on Muslims. So actually the N is strong, we feel like, but to do those deeper dives, I'm not gonna.
Layla, why did you support Donald Trump?
I appreciate your question. Thank you so much. I do want to say I do not support Donald Trump, nor have I ever supported Donald Trump, especially for president. This is somebody who literally had it so Netanyahu banned my family from going to our homeland. So just putting that out there. I think that national media and others wanted the uncommitted movement to look like it was a campaign to help elect Trump. But back in February, when there was months ahead of the general election, I was on national TV and every outlet I could be on, begging the Democratic Party and begging President Biden to shift his policy so we do not have somebody like Donald Trump in the White House. We were trying to show the Democratic Party that they did not have the support in a swing state like Michigan that largely determines who's going to be in the White House, that they needed to shift policy right now because the base of the Democratic Party needed that shift, and that they needed to do everything that they could in order to stop Donald Trump from taking office. And unfortunately, nobody listened to us.
But when I'm watching this dynamic, Salima, I want to bring you back in briefly. Yeah. It's interesting what we talked about right at the beginning of this panel discussion. You have this gentleman here who's been a civil rights activist all of his life, was at the Million Man March, understands American history and what's at stake in an election as a black American, and saying, okay, there's two bad candidates, but clearly one is much worse for black Americans. And then you had a lot of Arab Americans, but let's not get into the numbers again, but a significant chunk saying, well, no, genocide's a deal breaker. None of these domestic issues matter as long as a genocide's going on. And I don't think that's still been resolved.
It has not been resolved, and I want to commend you as well. Right now, the clock is being dialed back on so much of what you and our predecessors did, for civil rights and to uplift the needs of Black and brown people in America. And so right now, what we're seeing is that the Trump administration has established policies that directly threaten Black and Black Muslim communities. This big, beautiful bill, the tax cuts that are skewed towards white and wealthy, and the dismantling of DEI, which has caused over 300,000 Black women to lose jobs. Next month in my state, 2 million Pennsylvanians will not receive SNAP benefits. During the month of Thanksgiving, they will not receive food, assistance. And so all of this is deeply impacting Black people and Black Muslims, and not just Black people and Black Muslims. There are others that are deeply impacted by, what is happening as well. So thank you. Thank you for uplifting all that you do.
Thank you, Salima. When we were at the DNC, the first day of the DNC, uncommitted and other Palestinian leaders were able to sit down and meet with legacy civil rights leaders from within the Black community to talk about this very dynamic, that it feels like especially Arab Muslims are not showing up for Black communities and Black folks in this moment. And I don't know if there's a right answer to this, but what I do know is that it was so incredibly hard. And I talked about this a lot. It was like taking people from a funeral and asking them to vote for harm reduction. And as people have been watching the horrific images and videos that are coming out of Gaza, out of occupied Palestine, it was incredibly hard. And I'm not saying that that it was right or wrong, but it was just an incredibly hard choice that our community had to make.
Last word to Nabilah and Dalia. How do you get good data? How do you get good policy? How do you get truth and facts out to people?
Well, I mean, like, I'm kind of like trying to figure this out myself, because right now the billionaires have bought every single outlet and they're controlling. Yes, and
Not
so.
every.
I did that for you. So, but I think we have, folks like Mehdi and others that we can certainly get this data out to, to have more people speak about it, and to identify like influencers in the TikTok, the X world. I think that's one of the ways to go about it.
Dalia, last word.
I'm going to answer a question that wasn't asked. Sorry, but I think that was a good answer to your question. The answer to this question that wasn't asked is this entire thing, our protests on campus, our speaking out for Palestine, increasing anti-Semitism? No one asked that, but I'm going to answer. The answer is no, and I'm going to give you an anecdotal example. I get WhatsApp messages from my uncles in Egypt who have never met a Jewish person. And they are videos of young people on campuses celebrating the Passover Seder in an encampment. And the caption is like, Jewish Americans support Palestine. These protests are decreasing anti-Semitism among people who've never met Jews. They are actually exposing or bringing to light alliances that have always been there, but have never come to light. And the data supports these very alliances. So I think it's really important that we do get this information out, because the narratives that are being propagated are simply false.
Well said. On that note, give our panel a round of applause. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for coming out today on a weekday lunchtime for some great sandwiches and better conversation. Fantastic, sexy data. Support ISPU.org, support this organization, the work it does.